So we've simplified radicals before, but this is one other thing that we would do. Remember, we can't have a square root in the denominator of a fraction. And before, we would rationalize the denominator by multiplying by the square root of 3. The problem is that when we multiply by the square root of 3, in other words, if I were to take this whole thing and multiply it by the square root of 3, I'd end up with, when I multiply that by 5, I'd still have a square root of 3. So what we got to do is figure out a way to multiply this thing to make sure there are no square roots in the bottom. So what I want to talk to you guys are called conjugates. Okay, so the conjugate of this, if I say 5 plus the square root of 3, the conjugate of that are the same numbers, but you have a minus sign. So what I'm going to do is over here, I'm going to take this and put it in parentheses, and then I'm going to multiply it by the conjugate. And whatever I do on the bottom, I also have to do on the top. And so when you multiply this out, we still use the grid like we did before for quadratics. And I say 5 plus the square root of 3, and then 5 minus the square root of 3. My box doesn't look all that great here. I got to recalibrate the tablet. All right, so what's 5 times 5? 25. What's 5 times the plus positive square root of 3? 5 root 3. What's negative root 3 times 5? Negative 5 root 3. And then a negative root 3 times a positive root 3 actually becomes a negative 3. Now what's interesting about this, when we multiply by the conjugate, these middle terms cancel. You'll have a negative root 3 plus 5 root 3, negative 5 root 3 plus 5 root 3. That adds up to 0. So this whole thing is 25 minus 3. So on the bottom of this thing, I just end up with 25 minus 3, which is just 22. But then when I multiply this one through the top, when I distribute that through to the top, I end up with 5 minus the square root of 3 over 22. And you'll say, well, I don't know if that looks simpler or simplified. It is. So now how do we verify this? Just plug it in the calculator. I'm going to say 1 divided by, in parentheses, 5 plus the square root of 3. Close my parentheses. Whoops. I get this decimal. Now if I say parentheses 5 minus the square root of 3, close my parentheses, divided by 22, right? Same decimal. Does that make sense? So it's the same value, but we really just don't like square roots on the bottom of fractions. Okay? And I'll post that right here so that you guys can see it's the same. Okay, now we're done.